Hey guys, have you ever wondered what happened to Sanji and Wano and how much we really need to set the record straight on that whole event? If you haven't, I guess I really understand, but there's just been so much conversation recently about how strong the particular big three are, wherever some people are actually vying for their spots or not, and in particular what role the wings of the Pirate King have and how that is going to propel the whole narrative forward. Now, the whole reason that I think this conversation tends to get brought up a lot is because of the fact of Jinbei being a heavy hitter. Getting brought in seems to put Sanji's place in jeopardy. And believe it or not, I don't really think that was Oda's intention in doing that, not by any means, but I do think it's really kind of funny because he inadvertently set up for it perfectly. This is because really Sanji was set up to be not necessarily one of the heavy hitters when the show started. I mean, you gotta keep in mind too, he is one of the original East Blue members, but he's the last one recruited, and he does show his strength in Arlong Park, but still, that was kind of the last section of that, and then we go into the Grand Line, really. But as the series would go on, it did start to emerge that there were some varying power levels among the Straw Hats, and in particular, Zoro and Sanji always seemed just below Luffy. Then we had the whole event with Whole Cake Island, which then placed Sanji's bounty above Zoro, but in no way made him stronger than him because, for very obvious reasons, Zoro is probably just a little stronger than Sanji. I'm not saying it's a huge power divide, but there is just like a little gap there. And I feel like that gap is best summed up in Wano, and something that I think resonated with a lot of people because Sanji never gets to fight Kaido. And I think that's kind of significant because throughout the whole arc, there are multiple people that do or don't fight Kaido. You know, you have Kid, Law, Zoro, and then Luffy. And even characters like Kinemon, then Akazai 9 obviously, as well as Yamato all get to throw their hats in the ring for that, but Sanji never does. And I really do think that that is partially where all of this massive controversy of whether or not Jinbei is actually stronger than Sanji or not comes from. Yeah, we have the ribbing about the bounty, and I think that's intentionally played for laughs, but I feel the real conversation around this comes from the fact that Sanji kind of doesn't appear to have done as much in Wano. Appear kind of being the key word there, because he does actually do a lot. It's just, well, in keeping more with his original character, subtle. You know, I think that that's kind of funny because when you look at the two things that he's most remembered for throughout the course of Wano, one is beating Queen, which is something we'll have to circle back to, and then the other is the scene where he is captured by Black Maria and basically forced to call Robin for help. Now, I love this scene, and I know some people don't, but it's an important scene for his development and for Robin's, and in my opinion is designed to show just how much he really trusts his crew now. But a lot of people still hold that scene over him because of the fact he was captured and had to call for help. Now, it's important to remember that was an all-women crew, and basically he was never going to fight them, but still a lot of people hold it there. A lot of people tend to then, you know, skip to Queen being his big comeback scene, and I do think that there's a lot to admire about this. He kind of fights King and Queen a couple different times throughout Wano, you know, like when he's trying to save Momonosuke, and then when he's basically circling back around to help save everybody else in the courtyard after Luffy falls off for the second time. But most people tend to think of the scene where he basically fights Queen for the last time, unlocks Ifrit Janbei, and then pushes him off the castle. And a lot of people would still question, well, why doesn't it feel as satisfying to watch him fight throughout these scenes and then also have to deal with the fact of where we are now? Like, you see a lot of people trying to hype Sanji up by basically pointing out how much easier it seemed for him in Egghead than it was for Zoro, which simply isn't the case, but I feel like that is in no small part an overcompensation for the fact that Oda doesn't really let Sanji get to have the same combat feats that the others have. I mean, take the fight with Queen as a perfect example. Yes, he does fight Queen. He actually fights Queen a couple times throughout the arc, but he's the one that finishes him off. He's also technically not the first one to deal damage to him. Queen has to go around fighting both Marco and Chopper, and however much it appears that Chopper doesn't do damage to him, let me reassure you, he definitely did because he was tossing him around the room. And yeah, you can say the same thing for King and Zoro's fight. I mean, King fought Marco, King fought a couple of other people. That's not an exception to the rule, but the difference is Zoro had fought a lot of others too. In particular, Zoro had basically risked everything fighting Kaido a couple different times, even pushing himself past the limit to save Luffy's life, a feat that, you know, Sanji does not share in this arc. Sanji gets a lot of credit in this arc, in my opinion, or at least should get more, because he does help rally the troops when it appears that Luffy is dead again, as he is the one that helps calm Chopper and kind of seems to help reassure the samurai when their motivation is wavering. But even that is largely undercut by the fact that I think when most people think of the don't give up scene in Wano, it tends to either be Momonosuke declaring that they should win or Nami calling Kaido a liar. And the thing that famously Sanji kind of lacks in this arc, and they'd be weaning off of throughout the course of the later half of One Piece, was giving him the big aha moment where he usually had some kind of logistical planning that paid off massively for the Straw Hat. I think it's kind of sad to see these go because I think they were the highlight of Sanji's character and showed how he fought differently from Luffy and Zoro. Not with pure strength, but instead with intelligence. And to be honest, I've talked on this channel before about how Nami maybe should be actually the third pirate to be considered as part of this trio because, you know, she originally was the third member, and there's a lot of setup for for her. If she had had the lightning fruit, she'd have been a lot stronger, so on and so forth. But even had that come to pass, I think she still could have been not necessarily the same as Sanji, because I think Sanji should always have the role of the party mastermind, the person who's exceedingly good at reading the situation and then filling in the details to make sure everybody comes out on top. I think it's kind of funny that this was even a bit reflective in the original premise for Sanji, because originally he was going to be a gunslinger, much kind of like what Izo was to the Whitebeard pirates. I actually kind of like this a lot more, as it gives him more contradiction when compared to Luffy and Zoro, basically being the ranged fighter among them, and making his use of observation haki make more sense. But we probably would have seen a lot more of him doing those John Wick / Wanted style planning movements throughout his whole pirate career. And don't be wrong, I am fairly confident that Sanji is going to stick around as the third wing of the Pirate King. I just think we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to get a moment that's going to really settle that score. Because it really didn't happen on Egghead, but it might very well be happening on Elbaf with the Celestial Knights, because there is one guy in particular there, and I think you can guess who it is, that might very well be his perfect antonym. But if you like discussions of anime and manga, especially One Piece, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because I do a lot of conversations, theories, and other things like this.